Good Monday morning to you. We're looking at the AP Top 25. I'm specifically going to focus in on the big matchups of the weekend. So if you're curious about the Michigan Ohio State rankings, the Notre Dame and USC rankings, Oregon and Oregon State, and all that's going on out there in the Pac 12, this is the show for you. We're going to dig right into it. Those key matchups, as I identified them last week, were Michigan and Ohio State, Notre Dame and Southern Cal, Oregon and Oregon State, Tulane and Cincinnati. As I said, we have the Big Ten, the Pac 12 championships, and the American Athletic Championships all on the line with these games. So, who succumbed to the pressure and who did not? Well, those that did not were Ohio State, Notre Dame, Oregon, and Cincinnati. And in some cases, those losses are pretty meaningful. It did allow Michigan to climb up to number 2. Unfortunately, Ohio State drops to number 5. It will be interesting to see if the CFP follows suit. This would mean Ohio State is out. Notre Dame falls, or excuse me, Southern Cal climbs up to number 4, and Notre Dame falls to number 19. Oregon climbs up to number 16, and Oregon falls to number 15. One would think that those should have been reversed. However, I think those 4 losses for Oregon State are weighing them down compared to the 3 for Oregon in spite of the head-to-head competition. Tulane likewise only comes up 1 position. It's a little bit weak. However, Cincinnati takes a 4-point drop or 5-point drop or more and falls completely out of the top 25. 2 other games that weren't really on my radar but had some big impacts in terms of the top 10. We have to look at the LSU versus Texas A&M game and the Clemson versus South Carolina game. In both these cases, LSU and Clemson lost, and that drove them from the basically out of the top 10. Clemson falling to 10 and LSU falling to 11. I'd actually called out that LSU probably wouldn't finish out the season undefeated after they beat Alabama and were sitting there in that 5-6 position. This is where I always thought they belonged. Frankly, I think they need to be a spot or 2 lower after losing to Texas A&M. That's just not a good loss. South Carolina is definitely on the rise and is doing well. Still, I would have thought Clemson would have done better given their pedigree so far this year. So as promised, here's the overall top 25. You can see here in this chart that only Georgia and UCLA were unchanged. We had rises and falls in every position from 2 to 25. A very dynamic week for the AP Top 25. Very interesting to see if the CFP will follow suit. So who are the conference championship matchups that we'd want to watch? I'll just look at the Power 5 because they've got some interesting storylines. We'll start with number 1, Georgia. They'll be taking on LSU. I think Georgia should win this one. I don't see how LSU has much of a chance, especially with the game being played in Atlanta. So again, a kind of an effective home game for Georgia in comparison to LSU. Michigan is taking on an unranked Purdue team. This just goes to show how weak the Big Ten West division is. Again, this should not be a problem for them. If either of these 2 teams lose, it will make the CFP committee decisions very, very interesting as we dig into them a bit more. Finally, the Big 12 game. This ought to be a really good game, TCU and Kansas State. Looking forward to watching this. It was a relatively close game when they played, as were a lot of TCU's victories. Again, they'll be playing this in Arlington Stadium, just a little bit east of Fort Worth, where TCU's home field is. So effective home game for them. The Pac-12 game, I'm really looking forward to this one. You got Southern Cal taking on Utah. Southern Cal's only loss is against Utah up in Salt Lake City. Now they're going to play it on a neutral field. I think Southern Cal will definitely get the victory here. They are playing much better than Utah at the moment, in my opinion. And then finally, the ACC matchup game. Not a lot of bearing going on here in terms of who's going to get into the CFP and things like that. But they will be playing for some bragging rights, bowl seedings, things like that. That will come. So it'll be number 10 versus number 24. 2 other teams that need to be considered as we think about action this coming weekend, though they'll be idle, is Ohio State and Alabama, sitting at 5 and 6 in the AP poll. Probably will sit at a similar spot in the CFP. The big question on the CFP committee's mind is going to be, is Ohio State the best one-loss team in the country? I could easily see them saying yes and somehow knocking USC out of that picture, even if USC goes on and wins the Pac-12. It's just the favoritism that's there. It's been in the polls every single week across the AP and the CFP. And I could see that being a discussion that USC ends up losing. The other thing that could happen is if one of those teams in the top four ends up losing and you have that discussion between Ohio State and USC, there could also be a discussion about whether or not Alabama should come in. I could see that particularly happening in a TCU loss. TCU coming completely out, Ohio State coming in over USC, and Alabama taking a TCU position, if you will. I mean, effectively the deck gets shuffled. But the top four could easily end up becoming Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, and Alabama. It's all stuff to watch. It's the drama that will unfold over this weekend.